Hello and welcome to our tutorial. So what we're going to do now is have a look at some pictures. So this is an actual picture of Mars. This is not, but you can see the sort of patterned, so it's kind of a landscape with a lot of kind of flattish rocks kind of protruding from it. This is also from Mars. Again, a lot of kind of debris and rock on top, kind of weathered, kind of look like I said, this is an actual image as well. I'm just going to try and make something a little bit like that, if we can. So here we are in Blender, and we're going to start by, I'll start by turning on screencasting. I'm going to stay in Blender Render, and I'm going to change from, in the shading panel here, change to GLSL. So that basically turns on our graphics card, or lets us access some of the features of the graphics card that otherwise wouldn't be available to us. So I'm going to delete this default cube, although we'll be adding one back in a while. And I'm going to start by adding a plane. And I'm going to scale this up about 30 times, so S30, enter. So there it is. I'm going to go into edit mode and subdivide it again about 30 times, although it's an arbitrary sort of number, you don't have to we could do it less or more. So I'll take my camera and go G, move it roughly down here, and then I'm going to turn this on here, lock camera to view, and press 0 on the numpad, and then see if I can turn my camera around a bit. And basically what I want to get is something like that, where the ground plane here, I'm going to turn this off, the ground plane is wider than the camera view, so I'm just going to go scale on X for this and make it a tiny bit wider. Okay, so that's my my basic kind of camera setup. So I'm going to take this light here and just move it to the side. We're going to come back and work on that in a few minutes. I'm going to go into edit mode again. I'm going to grab a vert kind of halfway between the camera and the horizon, and I'm going to turn on proportional editing and go GZ. And I'm going to use the middle mouse wheel to sort of scroll out an area of influence. I'm going to raise this up a little bit. I'm going to pick a vert right at the back and go GZ and do the same. Make it a bit bigger. And maybe something here in the foreground. Okay, so just so we have kind of a rolling kind of terrain. So I'll leave it at that, and I've gone to object mode. I'm going to set it to smooth, and just to kind of reinforce that smoothness, I'm going to add a subsurface modifier, and that will make it nice and smooth. So now I'm up at about 4,000 verts. So that's our first stage. I was going to rename this ground. Now a couple of little things. Depending on how big you make this landscape, you may run into a couple of little problems that I'll try and outline to you here. If I select the camera and then over in the properties window click on the camera tab, just be aware that the camera has range. It has range for how close an object can be before it'll disappear, and then how far away it will go before it'll disappear. Now in the viewport, the end clip is set to 1,000, which is by default basically a kilometer away, but the camera by default only sees 100 meters. So if I peel this back, you'll start to see our landscape disappear. Okay, so we'll set this back to 100 because it doesn't affect us here, but conceivably if you made a very large landscape, you wouldn't be able to see the end of it if this wasn't set correctly, so just be aware of that. So let's take our landscape here and go look from the top. Go into edit mode, select it all, and unwrap it. And let's split our view, go into our UV image editor and load in an image. So I'm going to hit open, and I have an image on my desktop here called texture stone. It's sandstone, and I'm going to open it, and there it is there. Now if I go in texture view, well, I'm not going to see anything because I haven't assigned a material or a texture to this image. So let's do that now. So we can go over here. Now I could hit new, but there is a text or a material, sorry, already there that isn't being used. So I'm just going to use that. I'm going to call it ground. And I'm going to change the specularity of it. That's the only setting I'm going to change here for now. And I'm going to go over to my texture panel. And it says texture type none, so we'll change that to image. We'll load in this image here, which is of our sandstone. Because it's the default image, its coordinates are set to generate, so we'll change them to UV. And that's our texture here. Now, before I start scaling things, I'm just going to take my lamp, go to the lamp settings, and I'm going to change it to be a sun. Now I'm going to come back, and we're going to do a lot with this, but just for now, just so I can see everything on my ground plane, I'm going to make the lamp a sun. So I'm going to go back into edit mode, and then over here I'm going to go S5, enter. And this will give us a lot more detail. So I'm just going to scale it here in real time, and you'll see, depending on the size of your landscape, the amount of scaling you want to do may, so depending on the scale of this, you may have to make this bigger or smaller. And this obviously only works with a tileable texture. Otherwise you'll start seeing squares and repeat patterns. You can already see sort of repeats on this one. So this works a treat. Now there's other ways to do this. We could, in the texture panel, we could do that here. There's a whole bunch of ways to do it, but for now that's fine. We'll use the UVs. Now I'm going to close that for a second, and we will come back to it. And that's my landscape. We look to our camera, and that's roughly it there. So we can actually make that scale a little bit bigger. So I'll just very quickly make split this viewport again. Back in the UV image editor, and we'll scale it up a little bit more and get a little bit more detail in there. That looks a bit better. Okay. So that's not too bad, although again we can see repeat patterns, but we'll, when we start populating it with all the different bits of debris, it won't look so bad. Okay, so let's save this. We're going to go File, Save As, and we'll call it Mars, and go Save. And you can definitely see the repeat pattern now. Anyway, let us move on. So Shift A, Add Mesh, Cube. So this is going to be my rock. We're going to call it Rock 1 because we're going to have more than one rock. And before we do anything with it, we're going to add a subsurface modifier to it and set it to 2 subdivisions. Hit Apply. Then in our tools over here, we'll hit Smooth and G and Z. Now I'm going to just manipulate this a little bit before I start adding materials and textures to it. So you go GY, whoops, GX. Now it's all moving because of this, the proportional editing is still on, so I just want to take this kind of spherical look off it and make it more stone-like. I'm just going to go to solid mode, so I'm not worried about shadows. And I'm going to take the whole thing and I'm going to scale it on Z and make it a little bit flatter. Okay, and then the last thing I'm going to do is I'm going to select one vert at the bottom and go Shift S cursor to selected, and then in object mode I'm going to go Object, Transform, Origin to 3D Cursor, and that'll become obvious a little bit later why I'm doing that. If the object's going to be placed based on its origin or its pivot point, so if the origin is right in the middle, then it will be submerged into the ground, and you may want that, but this will now sit on top of the ground. So now let's unwrap it. So I'll, instead of just kind of randomly unwrapping it, I'll right click, I'll go Shift D, and okay, undo that. So Control Z. So I didn't need to go Shift E, I went to Control E. So select it, Control E, and then mark seam. So in wireframe mode, you can see I've added the seam. I'm going to select it, U, and unwrap. We'll go over here to our UV image editor, and there it is. I'm going to use the same image. Only this time I'm not going to scale it out because that's plenty of detail there. And obviously we want to use the same image because it'll have the same kind of color palette. So it'll look like it's derived from the rock that's around it. Now, let's go over and add a material, and we'll call this Rock 1. And we will remove its specularity, and we'll add a texture. We'll call it Rock 1 as well. Again, load in the image. Okay, so far so good. I'm going to go to object mode. So let's go down and turn on texturing. So a couple of things before we proceed. So I'm going to take the landscape, and this is the ground. I should really rename this texture ground here. And I'm going to go down to where it says influence, and I'm going to turn on geometry, and this will just give us a bump map. That will be a bit more interesting. So you can see we've got a bit more detail there, so I'm going to lift that up a little bit, not too much. This makes it look more three-dimensional. And I'm going to do the same on the rock. I'm going to turn on geometry, and you can see that it also has these sort of raised parts now, and we can go mad and do all sorts of things with it, but we'll just keep it subtle-ish. Okay, so that's our first rock. So I'm going to take that and move it over here. Now what I'm going to do is I'm going to go Shift D and make a duplicate, and we'll call it Rock 2. And while I'm here, I'm going to go Shift D and make Rock 3. Now I could make as many of these as I want, but just for illustration. So I'm going to go SX, and SY, I'm going to go to edit mode, and we'll move these around a little bit, and try and make a bit of, make it look different to the other one. Okay, so that's hopefully plenty different. Maybe we'll make it stick up there at the back, and then we'll do the same over here. I'm going to edit mode, and maybe SX, and we'll get one bit to protrude out. Okay, now we're also going to create new materials for this. So I'm going to go plus, I'm going to call it Rock 2. Now if you remember some of the reference images we looked at, they had sort of rocks of varying sort of shades. So I'm just going to change the diffuse setting on this. I'm going to reduce the intensity so this will be slightly darker. And I'm going to do the same with this. I'm going to go, this will be Rock 3. And make it even darker again. Not black now, but okay. And maybe we'll give that some sort of specularity. So it's a different type of rock altogether. Okay, so now what we're going to do is I'm going to go in object mode, I'm going to go B and select these. And then I'm going to use a tool that we haven't used before, which is Control G, which is to make a group. And they're going to turn green. Okay, so there is my group, and the group's name is group. So it's not very original, so we'll call it rocks. Now, let's go and make our detailed Martian surface. So with our landscape selected, I'm going to go to particle systems, I'm going to hit new, By default, a particle system, we'll rename this one, we'll call it rocks. By default, it's an emitter. It's like rain, or it's going to emit objects. So we're going to make it hair. So we have a hair system, and we're going to add in maybe 2000. Oh, that's 200. So 2000 particles. We're not going to do too many because we're going to end up actually making them real. And if we have too many, if you imagine, if you can, if I can get this outliner to move. At the moment I have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 objects in my scene, and I could very easily have 2006 objects in my scene, which would mean this would be unmanageable. So we don't want too many. So in this particle system here, we could use an object, which is what we did in class today. We could add in a single object, like rock 1, rock 2, but instead we're going to go to group, and we're going to put in our rocks group. And then we can put in the whole group, and then it'll go in threes, or we can go pick random, which is a really cool kind of feature. So it'll randomly pick which one is going to be used. So I'm going to look through my camera here. Now we're going to increase the randomized size, and we'll change the size of them as well. Now if you don't like their distribution, you can click on seed. Now I also don't like how, I'm just going to widen this up there a bit. I don't like how they're all kind of pointing up. I want them to be flat. So to fix that, I'm just going to go to my 3D view here, and I'm going to go to the rocks. And so this shiny one here is this one here. So I'm going to go into edit mode, and when I rotate this in edit mode, all of those rocks will also rotate here, because they're all the children of this rock. So I can do the same, so I can go back to object mode, do the same with the rest, select it all, and rotate it 90 degrees. But then they're all sticking up, so we won't do that, we'll leave them. What do we want to do with these? Yeah, so rotate them that way. And then our last rock, which is this one here, we go into edit mode, and again select all of them, all the verts, and we can rotate that way. No, that's not going to work for us, and we can rotate it that way. So that's much better in terms of the how they protrude from the surface. Okay, so that's not bad looking. Let's go have a play with this lamp. I'm just going to go file save. Now I'm going to go to, I'm going to change this back to being my properties, and look at the properties of this lamp. So the first thing I'm going to do is go to rendered mode. I'm going to change the color of it because it's Mars, so we'll make it a bit red. And that's very red. It's very bright red, so we'll darken that a little bit. That's our first task here. And then, and again, what I'm going to do is just go to my 3D viewport here and look through the camera. So, and make this my rendered view because it's smaller. And at some point it'll render there. And there we go. And then over here I'm going to make this solid, so I can see, attributes like its angle, etc. So I'm going to rotate this sun and try and get on this landscape here some shadows. So it's a little bit dark, so we'll brighten it up a little bit. Okay, so that's not too bad in terms of my preview here. I'm going to go back to rendered mode and down to shading, and just make sure that this is turned on. I think it is by default now. It says sky, otherwise we'll get all sorts of weird transparency. So I'm going to go back to my lamp and I'm going to turn on sky and atmosphere. Now there's a whole bunch of settings here that I'm not going to play with too much with you. Some of them are fairly straightforward, some of them not so much. none of them are ideal for what we want to do, because Mars is, you know, all of them have some kind of level of blue sky. But the more obtuse the angle, the closer to sort of a sunset we get. So we should get sort of a more kind of orangey sunset kind of sky. So that is not too bad. And I'll show you maybe another day how to play around with this. But it doesn't work in the game engine, so we won't dwell on it too much. Okay, so this is not too bad. So we'll save that, and we'll give it a quick render and see what it looks like. So this is our landscape. So let's escape out of that and go back here, and we're going to increase our number of particles. We'll give it 20,000. So now it's a far more crowded world, so maybe that's too much, so we'll make it 5. Okay. And what we'll do is we will... no, that's fine actually. So now what we're going to do is we're going to paint this. So we're going to go to Particle Edit, and as this is a hair system that we're putting on, we can use all of the tools available for hair, which are, a lot of them are to do with cutting hair, like, and brushing it and shaping it and combing it. But we're just interested in cutting. So I'm going to cut. The first thing to realize is when we're cutting the hair, there's a whole area outside of the camera that we're not looking at. Now, if this was a game, we wouldn't necessarily want to do this, because we don't want to have loads of rocks here and then turn left and it's empty. So kind of obviously we have to make sure it's fit for purpose. So I'm going to reduce the strength here, and I'm going to start reducing the number of rocks kind of to the right and left of what the camera can see. That'll just make things a bit easier for the computer to in terms of rendering. I'm also going to try and make a little path around this hill here, so I'm going to try and do that as if there's sort of a place where people walk. Maybe I'll actually go Control Z, undo that last one. And then I'm going to try and remove from the very so from over here I'm going to reduce the number of particles on the slope of this hill, and the same here. Then I'm going to increase the number of particles on the top, the same here, and then at the bottom of the hill, as if they've rolled down, and then the same over here. Okay, and back to cut. So we'll cut our path back through and maybe get rid of some of them. Okay, so let's see when we look through our camera what we get when we go back to object mode. So we've got clumping, and clumping is sort of and clumping at the bottom of a hill is exactly what we're looking for. So we'll go File, Save, and then we will render. And we can't see any of our clumping because it's all in the shadow. So let's see what we can do about that. So in our world settings, we can turn on ambient occlusion. Now when I do that, this is going to change profoundly. Or it should. There we go. It's being very slow and not behaving itself at all. So this ambient occlusion is, as the name suggests, it's about ambient light. So just let me check here. This is quite sluggish. So go to my system, and yeah, my graphics card is turned on. I just need a faster machine. So I'm going to change this ambient occlusion way down. So I'm going to go to say 0.05. So I want to be able to see things, but not. So I want to be able to see this here, but not change the effect of having kind of a low sun that's casting a shadow. So that's much better. I could even reduce that even a tiny bit more. Say 0.2 or 0.02. I render that again. Nope. I was right the first time. Okay, so as you can see, you could add in another particle system. You could make this quite complicated. If you were making this a single image and putting a character in it for like a menu for a game, you could go to town and spend a lot of time, have a lot of verts, but and have a lot of fun doing it. But what we're going to do now is we are going to have a look at how we would use this in the game engine. So first of all, if I go to the game engine and I press P, everything disappears. So that's not good. So first of all, let's put my light here, and we'll see. We'll go to textured mode and press P, and that's what I see in the game engine. Now that looks fine, but there are no particles. So how do we get these into the game engine? Well, the first thing we need to do is we need to be careful about how many we've got. This is not available in game engine, so I can't change any of the settings of the particle system here. All I can do is convert them to real objects. So before I do that, I'm going to go back to Blender Render so I can actually get at some of these settings. I'm going to actually let me render this and save it, just so we have a reference for it at the end of the tutorial. So I'm just going to go F3 and we'll call it Mars. Okay, so escape. And so the painting that I've done with in this mode, the particle edit mode, when you start painting, you lock all of the particles here. So I'm going to have to hit free edit, and when I do that, all of the painting I've done will be gone. But I'm okay with that. So I'm going to go free edit, and it warns me you're going to lose everything, and I go okay. So now we're back to having 5,000 particles unedited. And if I put this into the game engine, my game would not run smoothly, to say the least. So I'm going to reduce this down to say 500. Okay, and then go back into my particle edit mode. And again, I'm going to go F and make this quite large and reduce the strength a bit more. I'm going to thin them out in their general sort of take it off the top and off the top of my man there. And then as before, I'm going to add them, and we're going to add them here at the bottom. That's probably too many, so Control Z. So I will too few. So add them there. So try adding these at the bottom of the hill. Okay. And so texture mode, and we'll look through the camera. So not the same effect at all, but still, not the end of the world in terms of how it looks. So what we're going to do now is we're going to look at how do we change this particle system into something we can use in the game engine. So again, one or two things to do first. So if we want the objects to be static, all we need to do is apply the modifier. So apply this here. If we want these to be dynamic, then we need to go to physics, and I'm going to say dynamic, and I'm going to say convex hull. Now this is, so I haven't said rigid body, and the reason for that is there's going to be several hundred of them, and if they're all rigid bodies, the machine will grind to a halt. Dynamic convex hull. Okay, so these objects, whatever their settings are, including like their materials and textures, that's what's going to be applied to all these other objects. So I was going to save this, and just be aware that I'm going to go back to my outliner. As I said, we have 6 or 7 items here, and when I apply this, we're going to have a lot more, and it's messy to tidy up actually. So we'll go to our modifier stack, and I'm going to hit convert. So I'll just save this first so I can revert back. So convert. So now you can see I've got literally hundreds of rocks inside the game. Let's in reality we have. No, we don't have that many. No, we do. We have quite a lot. So we're in Blender Games. Let's hit P for the game engine. Okay, so that's it. That's what it looks like. And I'm going to just kind of illustrate to you that these are. So I select this object here, and I lift it up into the air, and then I hit P in the game engine. It will fall and it will move. And I haven't set up any camera movement here, but if I had a character that had camera movement, or that had movement, that had collision, as I moved around, I could interact with those rocks. Or if I had a gun and I fired it and I hit one of those rocks, they would respond to being hit with a projectile, just using the normal physics engine that's built into Blender in the game engine. So yeah, so that's making or using particle systems in Blender. Actually, let's get this light here and give it a bit more light. And yeah, so it's not a bad way to sort of populate your environment and make it look a bit more interesting. More effective, obviously, in a render engine than in the game engine, but useful in both. Okay, that's enough for now.